After the beautiful and inspiring Turn 8 Gundam, Mr. Yoshiyuki Tomino laid somewhat low with the Gundam franchise. He did try to give Camille Vidan a happy ending with the Zeta compilation trilogy, but that was received with mixed feelings. As 2014 approached, Sunrise decided to give full control to Tomino for a celebratory project meant to commemorate Gundam's 35th anniversary. Gundam Reconguista in G was the result of that project. And oh boy, is it something else. Not quite Gundam, yet impossible to not be Gundam. Not quite clear in some ways, yet allegedly super profound in others. A complete series that tells us something that feels like an incomplete plot. Yeah, it's a strange series to say the least. Prior to watching it, I had read a lot of G-Reco reviews and everything more or less said that it was hard to watch. Not because it was bad, but because the story was confusing. And this time, even though I do like weird stories, I have to agree, G-Reco gave me the impression that nothing was really important. Like if nothing had any stakes whatsoever. People got captured? No problem, let them go. I killed my instructor? No problem. I'll cry a little bit now, but I'll be over it by the end of the episode. You know what other series gave me that feeling? Macross 7. But you know, without my bro Basser. Anyway, just when I was about to call Tomino's bluff, I came across some interviews with other storytellers praising Tomino's use of wacky and nonsensical plot elements to overall convey the absurdity of war factions, and the rearmament of Japan. And that got me thinking, is Tomino really a mad genius that weaponized storytelling to deliver a brutal anti-war message? Or are we just reading too much in between the lines? Gen Urobuchi of Madoka Magica's fame believes in Tomino's genius by claiming that G-Reco is a story about the potential danger of stories, a story that renounces stories. On the other hand, in a 2015 interview, Tomino admitted that the story was lost amidst the action scenes and it all was a big miscalculation. He said, "Frankly, I didn't think it would be this horrible. Fundamentally, people don't respond to stories made with cold logic. If the logic is overpowering, it won't be a story you can be emotionally attached to. That's all." Leaving aside Tomino's harshness towards himself, we have two widely different opinions of the very same story. So who is right? Well, both and none. You see, trying to tell you how to feel or interpret one piece of art is something entirely impossible. That's the magic of art. Everyone can react differently and there's almost no wrong answer. So my friends, I'm Absa, and even though G-Reco didn't work for me, I think that I know why it didn't work. And it has nothing to do with the bad-written story angle or the weaponized narrative angle. It mostly has to do with Tomino's "people don't respond to stories made with cold logic" statement. Anyway, as per usual, big spoilers for G-Reco ahead. Specifically the series. I won't be talking anything about the movies. On paper, the story of G-Reco has all the tropes we have come to expect from a Gundam show. A child pilot who accidentally falls into the super prototype that is the mobile suit, titular mobile suit, a war fought for resources with an Earth Federation XP, the capital army, a Zeon XP, the Amerians. We even have something akin to the R-Gamma, with members of both factions with the megafauna. There's also space travel, a masked man who is an ace pilot but can never defeat the protagonist, and to make matters even more blatant, G-Reco even mimics the big reveal of Turn 8 Gundam by having a certain faction of space humans be the final bosses. The Venus Glow faction that wants to finish the Reconguista operation. Now, Tomino explained that the G stands for Gundam, but it primarily means ground. He further explained that the word Reconguista is based on the Spanish word reconquista, the act of conquering again. This works super interestingly because at first the series title can be alluded to the fact that Valerie is reclaiming the Gundam, just like other universal-centric protagonists. But as the story unfolds, the concept of reconquering of the ground starts to make sense. As to why the change of letter? Well, supposedly the Japanese audience preferred a voice G in the title. That meant Reconguista instead of Reconquista. But if you ask me, and considering that I do know my Spanish, Reconquista sounds much more powerful than Reconquista. Back to the story, let me give you the bird's eye view of the conflict. We have two important places on Earth, one in between space and Earth, and two important on space. On Earth, we have capital territory and Ameria. There is also Gondwan, but nobody cares about it. The zone in between Earth and space is the umbilical cord, also known as the space elevator, where humans get their energy packs from a place much farther away called Venus Globe, one of the two important places in space. The other is Towasanga, a moon colony that houses the slightly more technologically advanced spacenoids that want to recolonize Earth. So, recap. Capital territory and Ameria on Earth, the umbilical cord elevator that connects Earth and space with Sancto Porto standing at the top, Towasanga at the moon, and the Venus globe far away. Easy peasy, right? Well, not really. The story never gives you establishing shots nor the much dreaded info dumps for us to grasp where everything is in relation to our characters or factions. The weird names don't help at all. But hey, that's the least of our problems. Let's move on. The G-Reco story started more or less in November 2010, where Tomino previewed an unfinished novel in the 100th issue of Gundam Ace called Hajimetai Capital G no Monogatari, which roughly translates to the beginning of the tale of Capital G. This whole story revolved around the space elevator. This means that from the very beginning, the space elevator was going to be a central point to the story. According to the Regal Century chronology, Universal Century existed as a period in humanity's history that was filled with war and sickness, and humanity was almost driven to extinction. The surviving people of Earth clustered around an area in the Amazon, the last green place on the planet at the time, and restored the Capitol Tower, a massive space elevator from the UC era. Around this structure, a religion is founded, Sucordism, as in space umbilical cordism. We humans believe anything when we are hungry. Anyway, the reason for this inhuman level of worship towards a structure is because the elevator is where the photon batteries come down from space, and without that, society has no power source. Now, behind the photon batteries is the Hermes Foundation, who have a monopoly on the production and supply of photon batteries and other resources. The Hermes Foundation began as a group of space nerds who had access to UC-era technology, but then moved to the Venus globe. Regardless of location, the Hermes Foundation ingrained in Sucordism a religious fervor for the elevator and, more importantly, a taboo against new technology, all to keep humanity in check and avoid another catastrophe. Now, let's take a look at the Sucordism principle. Humanity's unchecked technological growth was the root cause for the wars of Universal Century. To restore Earth, society and technology must remain static and unchanging and avoid rapid growth. As such, all human nations must run on energy from photon batteries provided by the Sucordist Church to control and manage their growth. Various technologies are seen as taboo, as well as certain academic pursuits such as astronomy, to prevent societal upheaval. Sounds super fishy, right? Well, that's how they roll in the Regal Century. Fast forward a couple of centuries and the Amerian people are starting to resent the fact that Capital Territory, the territory that surrounds the Capitol Tower, is the one managing and distributing the photon batteries, so they begin to break the technology taboo and start forming an army and disguise one of their ships as a pirate ship that wants to attack Capitol Tower. Unbeknown to them is the fact that Capitol Tower is also breaking the taboo and rearming itself, going all the way to having a splinter faction that will break from the Capitol Guard and be known as the Capitol Army. And all of this really started when a renegade Towa Sangan decided to come to Earth and spark interest in war because, well, because he was bored. Yeah, forget a grandiose ideal or a stance. Nah. Why bother with speeches like Giron or Casval? Mr. Kamparusira was just bored to the point of an all-out war. And all of this sounds very Gundam-y, right? Well, the main concern about all of this is that nothing that I have been saying is ever stated explicitly, aside from Kampa's real motives, which are more or less explained towards the third part of the show. All of the other things that I said, you have to piece them together in your brain. And if you were not paying attention, well, that's too bad. And I get it. Fiction is allowed to make you think, and not everything needs to be explained to a T by a narrator. But boy, does G-Reco make it hard to grasp what's going on. Anyway, with all of that backstory in mind, we have arrived to the point where the series starts, with the megafauna pirate ship attacking Capital Tower and the Towa Sangan Recon party checking out Earth with their mobile suits, and conveniently, one of them is the titular mecha, the G-Self. Oh yeah, and there's also the reveal that the protagonist is really the son of a royal family from the moon, and the fact that he is the only one that can fully pilot the G-Self is entirely by design, in something that feels like a cheap subversion of Tem and Amuro's father-son relationship, but with young Amuro accidentally falling into the mecha. Yeah, it's weird. And before I keep on going with how confusing the plot is presented, Uno Tsuneshiro, a magazine editor and professor of pop culture studies from the University of Kyoto, had this to say about the story structure. Fans said that you only figure a lot of the stuff out after the long process of watching the recorded episodes over and over and also taking down notes. But in my humble opinion, this disorientation is somewhat intended. In a world where we experience things for real, there is never any God's eye view that explains things in an orderly fashion. The experiences of each person are disconnected and dissociated from one another. In contrast, a world portrayed in a narrative film usually has a point of view integrated by the creator and is therefore organized. He, along with Gen Urobuchi, are two of the most prominent figures defending Tomino's storytelling. And to be honest, I think that I can more or less agree with them. Storytelling doesn't need to be tame to be engaging. It doesn't need to be all laid out for me to get invested. If a story is interesting and engaging, I'll definitely do my best to try to keep up to pace. In fact, it's my humble opinion that the trouble with the story is something else entirely. Nothing feels menacing. Nothing ever feels dangerous, and for every action, there's little to no consequence. There is no gravity to the events. Absolute pun intended. Throughout the entirety of the show, things happen that should impact the lives of the protagonist, but nah, everything stays almost the same. In the very first episodes, Valerie, our young pilot boy protagonist, gets a hold of the Gundam, and a couple of scenes later, he kills the love interest of our young pilot girl protagonist, Ida. She feels it, cries a little bit, but nah, she starts working with Valerie without any trouble. Valerie accidentally kills his instructor, but nah, don't worry about it. Just shed a couple of tears and everything will be back to normal. The worst offenders are the leaders of Capital Territory and Ameria, since they get together on various occasions and knowingly that they are both breaking the technology taboo, let's be friends, right? And then, after a very hectic fight, right there outside Sancto Porto, where the Earthnoids were fighting the Space Noids, with the Towa Sangan generals discussing the Reconguista in ground, nah, that's not important. Let's go to the Venus globe to check out the photon batteries. And my friend, the Venus globe has the stupidest fight ever. Don't ask me why, but there's a gigantic pool in the middle of nowhere. It's really a large disk called the Sea Disk that's 62 miles or 100 kilometers in diameter. Anyway, the thing is that that place is super sacred and no fighting can happen there because it could be catastrophic. And guess what happens? Valerie and Commander Kiambeki of the GIT forces, another space note group that wants to take part in the Reconguista, start to fight there. And not only that, but Kia keeps saying that they should be very careful to not damage the sea floor. And guess what happens? He damages the floor and water starts coming out. Oh, but it doesn't end there. The damage is so great that the only way to stop the leak is to sacrifice his mobile armor and use it as a ginormous block with him inside. My friends, I kid you not, this is quite frankly the stupidest fight in the entire Gundam franchise. Even worse than Uso's V2 against the Bikini Girls from way back from Gundam Victory. And yes, before anyone tells me who am I to dismiss such an absurd mecha fight as something other than that, yes, there's another angle that can be said about Tomino's construction of this story. You see, with Tomino being the madman that we believe he is, all of that foolishness and nonsensical situations and absurd conflicts may be on purpose. The entire metatextual message, Tomino's true intention with G-Reco, is to tell us that war is stupid and absurd. No grandiose ideals, no glamour, no honor. War is simply absurd. Every situation that leads to war is absurd and foolish, and there's no reason to paint it in a glamorous or epic light. Period. Do I agree with that? Well, I have to say that seen through that lens, G-Reco becomes a very self-aware and critical piece of media, almost to the point of parodying the entire Gundam franchise and subverting all of its tropes by telling us, remember Amuro and Char and the Dakar speech, Six Xian and the Axis Shock? Yeah, it's foolish and they're all fools. War is something that can't be understood, that shouldn't be romanticized and should be shown as the complete mess that it really is. Was that really his intention though? Maybe, maybe not. It's a great intellectual gymnastic exercise to justify how confusing G-Reco really is. And hey, if it works for you, go ahead. Now, for me it doesn't work. And if you stay with me a little bit longer, I can tell you exactly why. Remember Tomino's words that said that people don't respond to stories made with cold logic? That if the logic is overpowering, it won't be a story you can be emotionally attached to? I can definitely vouch for that. My problem with G-Reco is that the characters are too meh. No one is as epic as Char or as tragic as Uso or even as centered as my man Bright Noah. The standout character for me was Genius Klim because of how bizarre he acted. For all of the hate that Double Zeta receives, Jura's character arc and growth is much more interesting than any of G-Reco's characters. And even if we believe the theory that G-Reco is confusing by design, that doesn't remove the fact that I felt absolutely no connection to any character. Nothing felt serious, and none of anyone's actions seemed to have any weight whatsoever, except the G-Self, which from the very beginning was super overpowered. That was my exact same problem with Macro 7. It's just that Macro 7 had Fire Bomber, so that made it much bearable than G-Reco. But then again, the only caveat here is that I'm not necessarily the target audience, since I'm from a generation that grew up with Dragon Ball Z, Bleach, Naruto, Hunter x Hunter, and those series had some epic moments. For me, the best way to deliver a message is through epic storytelling, through grandiose moments where the fate of something bigger than us is at stake. That's probably the reason why I did like Unicorn, since it was filled with super epic moments. Even Gundam Narrative had a couple that were great. Hathaway has a fantastic scene where, if I remember correctly, he's in the hotel room remembering that he is doing all the terrorist acts so that humanity doesn't forget the sacrifices made by everyone in the Axis Shock. Macro's Frontier has a brutal moment where Ozma is telling Alto that if the Vajra become immune to the reactionary weapons, then he'll use missiles. And if they become accustomed to missiles, then he'll use the dagger. And if they become immune to the dagger, then he'll use his fingernails, and so on and so forth. It's a fantastic moment that shows the tenacity of this character. That's what I like to see in my fiction. Larger than life characters with epic moments, not some confusing stories where we have the main character using the bathroom inside the mobile suit. In essence, I prefer fiction that inspires. And nothing sums up this point as much as this panel from a Justice League comic. After defeating some aliens that pretended to be humanity's saviors, Wonder Woman asks, "Are we doing too much or too little?" referring to humanity. When does intervention become domination? Superman then responds, "I can only tell you what I believe, Diana. Humankind has to be allowed to climb to its own destiny. We can't carry them there." Confused, Flash then asks, "But that's what she's saying. What's the point? Why should they need us at all?" And the grandfather of all superheroes answers, "To catch them if they fall." This is a fantastic line of dialogue that illustrates, at least for me, the importance of having fictional stories that inspire us. Weaponized narrative or weaponized storytelling is defined as a fire hose of narrative attacks that gives the targeted populace little time to process and evaluate. It is cognitively disorienting and confusing, especially if the opponents barely realize what's hitting them. This does indeed sound like G-Reco, yet I don't really believe that Tomino was aiming for that, since in a work of fiction, if you get too confused, you'll most likely stop enjoying it and simply put it away. To be completely transparent, I didn't enjoy this show. I mean, I do like series that make me think, but this was a case of too much information to process without anything that made me want to actually process it. Nothing has weight to it, so I couldn't care less for anyone. On the other hand, the visual aspect is amazing. The character designs and mechas are super interesting, and while weird, they're less bizarre than those of Johnny Gundam. Also, the G itself did grow on me, and if this video wasn't this long already, I'll definitely talk more of its unique design and the use of different color schemes thanks to its photon battery. Suffice to say that even though the Turn A Gundam is much more iconic, I prefer the G-Self's face silhouette, and hopefully we'll get its master grade sometime soon. Anyway, I purposely left out anything that had to do with the movie since, well, they must be special, right? Not even Zeta Gundam had a 5-film compilation. I'll definitely talk about them, just not in the foreseeable future. With all that said, what's your opinion of G-Reco? Did you like it? Better yet, do you believe that Tomino was using the narrative as a weapon to subvert Gundam tropes, or did he just fail to tell a cohesive and meaningful story with the series? Please leave it in the comments, and as you may or may not know, my name is Absa, and you can continue the conversation over at Twitter, where you can follow me at Absalonicas, and on Instagram, where I post pictures of my figures, my cats, and sometimes even myself. I'll be trying to talk more about anime, comics, and mechanical design via model kits. And till next time, always remember that in fiction lies power. So let's use it to forge a new type of story, our hero's journey.